Howdy folks, good afternoon. Here's a third video for today. So I'm over at Caspersen Beach near Venice, Florida. This is actually one of my other local favorite beaches in this part of the state. But yeah, where I'm basically chilling out is large dune right behind me. And then we got some slabs of limestone, which I do believe were added here, if I may not be mistaken. But for all I know, they could be here naturally, just because adding these rocks helps prevent further erosion from happening. Just because this is a very active region of the Gulf, so it has a tendency to really erode a lot of the coastline. Point in fact, Caspersen has actually been known to experience massive erosion in the past. So it's possible that that's the reason why these are here, is to slow down that rate. Because that's the thing about Mother Nature. She can go at whatever pace she so wishes. It's up to her. She's in charge. So I want to embrace a bit of my Aquaman side, as it were, and I wanted to show you guys a couple of neat specimens that I found while out on my little swim. So let's get into it, shall we? Alrighty, so our first specimen is something called the 5 Keyhole Urchin, which is basically a type of sand dollar. Sand dollars are actually, yeah, they are related to sea urchins. And oftentimes, these homies are considered to be echinoderms. So you may be wondering, what is an echinoderm? Well, it's essentially a marine organism that lacks a backbone. So in other words, they're invertebrate, or they are an invertebrate. And with that being said, too, they tend to have some sharp points on their body. And most echinoderms have a bit of a star shape. So actually, another well-known type of echinoderm that you may think of in general are starfish. So in a sense, the sand dollar is a distant cousin to the starfish. Because as you can see on its back, you see a little bit of that star pattern. So fortunately, I actually just found this one just along the sand here nearby. So this one is already dead. It's not alive by any means. Because if it were alive, it would have like a brown coat on the sand dollar. So it would feel a bit sharper too. Because they can hurt, like if you hit it at the right spot. But what's neat about the 5 Keyhole Urchin, or sand dollar, is they have these 5 open holes. You may be wondering, what are those for? Well, they actually serve an excellent purpose. So these holes, so you figure they're in the sand, right? So let's just pretend the rock in the foreground is the sand. So like oftentimes, they're like slowly grazing, looking for food in the sand. But sometimes algae or any other phytoplankton might be above the sand dollar. So what happens is the food can have a chance to pass through these holes, and essentially the sand dollar can grab the food that was once on top of its back. So that's why they have those holes right there. Now what's also neat too is those 5 points that you see, those are essentially its gills in a sense. That's how it breathes while it's in the water. But it's just really cool to look at. So now, looking at its underside, you can definitely see it's all connected, very symmetrical. And you see that hole right in the center? that is essentially its mouth. And inside their body, there's actually something called, I think it's called Aristotle's tools. I can't remember the exact name of it, but I know it started with Aristotle. But that is essentially, it's inside the sand dollar, and that is how they process their food. So in a sense, you could say these homies kind of act as a filter feeder for our waters. Okay, I'm going to show you guys the next specimen. Give me just a second. Alrighty, so our next specimen that we're looking at is something called an Atlantic giant cockle. Now, these are basically a type of bivalve, which means that it has a matching symmetrical shell to this organism. So these guys are actually one of the largest cockles in the state of Florida. Usually at a max, the whole shell can have a length of over 5.2 inches. And they're commonly distinguished by having these brown and light brown marks along its rib of the shell. But then when you look on the underside, it's a lot smoother and it's a bit dark too, a bit of a dark brown. So these guys are also filter feeders as well, and these are highly sought after too, you know, in terms of how much food they provide for our wildlife and even for businesses and the state. But these are also known as the heart cockles too. That's another name that they commonly go by. But yes, the Atlantic giant cockle. But yeah, you can find these in the Atlantic Ocean, but oftentimes with our currents, they can even wind up in the Gulf as well, which is essentially where we are. But so now I'm going to show you guys the next specimen. So here we go. Alrighty, so our next feature, which is another type of bivalve, is something called a turkey wing, also known as a zebra arc. It's essentially what these are classified as. They're a type of arc. Now, if you may be wondering if it has anything to do with the Ark of the Covenant, no, I'm afraid you would be wrong, even though I may fit the personality type of Indiana Jones. But no, these are not related in such ways. But these are also known as zebra arcs because, well, this one has been in the water for quite some time. But if it was in its pristine condition, you would see that it would have stripes, brown stripes and white along the shell. And thus, in a way, it resembles looking at a zebra. And that's how it gets its name. Now, with that being said, they usually are found all over the Caribbean, and they are also highly sought after in terms of a food source. And they're one of the most important filter feeders, as they tend to feed on the plankton, and they also act as a substrate for any other predators, which is basically another way of saying that it serves as a food source. But yes, they're commonly known to have that sort of like a rectangular shape, and then towards the middle here, also known as the, what's it called? The umbo. It's basically a straight line. But then, yeah, as you go along the edge, it has a bit of some creativity going on, some curves and rounding. It's a lot going on just with one shell. So alright, let's move on with our last specimen, and I think that should about wrap up the video. So here we go. Alrighty, here's our last specimen. This is a tiny little homie. See how it kind of has like a round shell and then it has an opening at the top to the left? This is something called a Florida Cerith. 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 Now, these are also very common in Florida, hence really the name, why it's called the Florida Cerith. And these are also related to worm shells or even turret snails. So this is basically a type of gastropod. Another excellent type of gastropod that many of us know is the king conch. But conches, there are several types. Conch is just a simple classification of grouping these types of organisms. So just keep that in mind. Now, what's neat about these guys is, yeah, they are slender snails, and you know, it basically has a whorl shape. Now, with that being said, it kind of has like a beaded-like feeling. So it's kind of rough on the touch. Kind of feels like, well, kind of feels like it's beaded. It's like the best explanation for it, you know. I guess you really don't know until you feel it, right? But yeah, typically these guys also like to feed on algae and even detritus, which basically includes sediments. So you'll commonly find these guys quite easily in the water. Not only that, but you can also see them even in inlets too. So they're quite versatile in terms of where you can find them. They're quite abundant, you could say. So yeah, that's really the 4 separate organisms that are specimens, because none of them are alive, that I found. So, and that, like I said, there's so much more out here. I mean, you can even see people snorkeling right now, just looking through shells. But Caspersen Beach is very well known for shark teeth. That's usually what most people are out here for. Now, have I actually found a shark's tooth out here? I think I have before. But honestly, I'm that kind of person who doesn't really actively search for it. Rather, I tend to rely on just sheer luck. Like if I stumble upon it, oh, cool. But I've always found that the harder you try to look for something, the harder it takes to find it. I don't know. I guess it's just a little philosophy of mine. But yeah, Caspersen Beach is a cool spot, you guys. Especially if you're visiting this part of the state. So, alright. Hope you learned something regarding the gastropods, bivalves, and even the echinoderms. So 3 different types, all within one video. And they all provide a service in these waters. That's what helps keep this water to be a bit cleaner. So, alright you guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. And once again, Journey on a Journey is outwards. Take care, folks. See ya.